In the cold, quiet early evening of November 30th, 1896, two young boys, Herbert Coles and Dunham Corretter, were riding their bicycles along the beach near Anastasia Island, just outside St. Augustine, Florida, when something unusual caught their eye. Partially buried in the sand was a massive, pale, organic mass, roughly 18 feet long and 7 feet wide. It was unlike anything they'd seen washed ashore before. Weighed down by its immense bulk, it had sunk slightly into the sand. The boys didn't know what it was, but they knew it wasn't a typical whale carcass, so they rode back into town to report it. The first scientific look. Dr. DeWitt Webb. On December 1st, 1896, Dr. DeWitt Webb, a local physician and founder of the St. Augustine Historical Society and Institute of Science, walked out to the site to examine the remains. Webb was one of the few people in the area with any scientific background. His initial impression was that this was a poorly decomposed animal of some kind. Its rubbery texture, pale pink color, and sheer size astonished him. Webb described its surface as a tough, collagen-like substance that could be cut only with great difficulty. The exposed part measured about 18 feet long and 7 feet wide, and Webb estimated the total weight at around 5 tons. The carcass appeared mutilated and badly decomposed, but among the features Webb noted were apparent stumps that looked like arms or appendages, leading him to speculate the remains might represent a giant cephalopod, unlike anything known at the time. Webb did not immediately know what it was, but he thought it might be a new species or something previously unknown to science. Early speculation and scientific correspondence. Webb arranged for amateur photographers Edgar Van Horn and Ernest Howitt to photograph the carcass on December 7th, 1896. At least 2 images were taken, including views that showed what appeared to be arm-like extensions and the massive size of the object relative to Webb himself. Webb sent descriptions and photos to prominent scientists, including Professor Addison Emery Verrill of Yale University, then a leading authority on cephalopods. Verrill initially entertained the idea that the object might be a giant squid or related cephalopod, giving rise to speculative names like Octopus giganteus, a bold, unofficial label that literally means giant octopus. At the time, no such species was known, and cephalopods of even moderate size were poorly understood by the broader scientific community. A second stranding and public interest. In January 1897, storm tides dislodged the carcass. It was briefly washed back out to sea, but soon washed ashore again on Crescent Beach, a couple of miles south of the original site. Locals and visitors gathered to see it again, drawn by newspapers and word of mouth. The sight of the huge, rotting mass, partially mangled, lacking clear anatomical structure, and unlike any familiar creature, fueled speculation and curiosity. During this period, Webb sent tissue samples and photos to museums and scientific contacts. Newspapers picked up the story, often embellishing descriptions. Local residents and tourists gathered at the beach to view the carcass. As weeks passed, natural decomposition and disturbance by visitors accelerated the decay of the remains, making precise identification harder. Attempts to preserve and study the carcass, concerned that the specimen would be lost to tides and further decomposition, Webb organized an effort to move it inland. With the help of several horses and locals, they pulled the carcass several miles closer to St. Augustine, above the high tide line. For a short time, it became a tourist curiosity, with people coming to observe the sea monster that defied easy explanation. However, the odor of rot and continued decay made it an increasingly unpleasant attraction. Within weeks, much of the mass had deteriorated. No comprehensive dissection or scientific documentation occurred at the time, and detailed records of its final fate are missing. Interest in the St. Augustine carcass resurfaced decades later when researchers revisited early descriptions and tissue samples. Mid-20th century analysis. In the 1950s, cryptozoologists and marine researchers found old newspaper clippings and photos, sparking renewed curiosity about the 1896 discovery. 1971 histological study. A preserved tissue sample of the St. Augustine carcass was sent for detailed laboratory analysis. In 1971, cellular-level examination showed that the tissue did not match cephalopod samples or known marine invertebrates. Instead, it was connective tissue consistent with whale blubber, the dense collagenous matrix found in large cetaceans. This suggested that the carcass was not an unknown cephalopod, but most likely a large mass of decomposed whale blubber, probably from a sperm whale, that had broken up and washed ashore. Modern globster YD. More recent studies of similar globsters, unidentified organic masses washed up on beaches, have confirmed that many such carcasses turn out to be decayed blubber, or connective tissue from large whales, sometimes showing fibrous, amorphous structures that initially resemble limbs. This pattern helps explain why the St. Augustine carcass baffled early observers. Whale blubber decomposes into a fibrous, rubbery mass that can appear arm-like when partially unearthed and distorted by waves, bacteria, and scavengers. Legacy and interpretation. The St. Augustine monster of 1896 remains one of the earliest and most famous examples of a globster, a term coined much later for amorphous carcasses that wash ashore without clear anatomical features. Over time, it became part of seaside lore. Some early scientists and newspapers speculated about giant cephalopods. Local curiosity boosted tourism for a short period. Later analysis helped usher in a better understanding of how whale decomposition can produce bizarre, unrecognizable carcasses. Today, the St. Augustine monster is recognized not as a real sea monster, but as a fascinating chapter in the history of marine science and public imagination, where observation, incomplete evidence, and speculation intersected in a very human attempt to understand the unknown.